It's really the story of humanity. And because you'll see, as you've learned about the ACEs here, is that children who are traumatized earlier in life, it seems to have an impact on how their life course unfolds and how, and as well as resilience. And so I really track them, working with youth all the way into older adulthood, not only as a practitioner, but as a researcher, to look at the long-term impact and how coping and resilience made a difference. And those people that had better later life health and well-being and adaptive coping compared to those that did not. Also included in that PDF, I encourage you to take a look at these articles that are down below. I don't know if you can see if it's that what I'm highlighted here. One's a podcast. And I pitched the use of alternative medicines within the prison system. They should be used everywhere, but especially within the prison system, there's a lot of promise there. But also the lessons learned from older adults in prison. We'll talk about them here today, but we won't get into detail. I also talk about a vision of caring justice in a model called caring justice that replaces not only criminal justice in the criminal justice system, but it creates a new paradigm for thinking about the role of love as opposed to hatred and kindness in compared to brutality, to replace what's going on now. And injustice is replaced with justice in the form of truth and balance. We need the world back in balance. You know, the scales, when we seem unequal, we need it back in balance, even. Okay, and that's where the heart-centered consciousness comes into play here, as represented here, that putting compassion back into our culture so that we have the moral compass, once again, to tell the difference between what is right and wrong. Because a lot of what happens in the justice system is the difference between telling what is right and wrong and the decisions we're making as a collective in what we should do with life and death situations. I did put in the chat, you can put in there any credentials or any information about yourself you want to share and your experience with that. I'll try to take a look at it during the presentation. So our opening reflection. Einstein said, now let me tell you, we need to pay careful attention here. He did go to Princeton. He was an East Coaster, but had a West Coast consciousness. But and the reason why we're going to pay attention, because I don't know of any other person, but they preserved his brain in a jar. You can Google it. You can find his brain on a jar. Now, when he says something, maybe we should listen. All right. So, but he says, anybody want to read it out loud? My counterpart, Tina, how about you?
Absolutely. The problems that exist in the world today cannot be solved by the level of thinking that created them.
Thank you so much. You did it so eloquently. So just reflect a minute, and Tina, you can come back in, or anybody else. What are your thoughts? No right or wrong. You could type it in the chat. But I'm asking you to think in a college class. Isn't that cool? I'm not just telling you what to do. It's what do you think? What's the meaning? What do you take from that? The problems that exist in the world today cannot be solved by the level of thinking. Hannah says we need to be progressive and forward thinking. Great, thanks for sharing.
It seems that problems can be easily created, but in order for resolution, you have to have that next level. It's almost like anything without any intellect can create massive destruction and massive problems, but then you have to have some level of sophistication in order to resolve it or to solve it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Leslie chimes in, it's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome, right? Another Good way of looking at it. Don't you love that there's multiple interpretations and all of them configure our collective thought field around this? And I write a lot about, and that part of the articles that I think Demisha shared with everyone was moving from fear-based problem focus to creative solution focused thinking. From separation thinking, we're all separate from one another, to being part of unity. So going higher level of thinking, how we think about a problem and how we think about solving it is very different. It's another interpretation to add to the mix. So we're going to now take you can continue to put your thoughts in the chat if you want. And the next picture I'm going to show, I'm going to ask you to look at it straight ahead. Keep and think about what you see. And then when you have an image in your head, tilt your head as far as you can to the left, depends how flexible you are and how you go, and see if what the image you see, and then determine is it the same image or a different image. Okay, so you ready? This is we talked about intellectually. Now we're going to just visualize it. Okay, there you go. Straight ahead and then to the left. And before you say anything, just let everybody get a view. What do you think? Oops. Jack sees a mother and son praying together. Did you see the same thing twice, Jack?
Wait, what?
You did? Did you see it straight on and to your head to the side? Same thing?
Oh no, I tilted my head like kind of like this.
Okay, I'm not seeing it good. I have to have my screen better. Okay, but you saw the same thing. There you are, Jack. You're on my other part too here. Okay, anybody else see the same, different thing first time around? You raise your hand or chat. Okay,
Oh no.
go ahead, Jack. Okay, Hannah sees mountains and their reflection. Sarah sees what Jack saw. What are your thoughts? First of all, some people do or don't see the same thing. And then among the group, you're seeing different images. Some the same, some different. Perspective is vital. Yes. Okay, so some of you are seeing different things. So what's a couple, we could spend like the whole hour on this, but what are a couple of takeaway thoughts you can take with this idea? Same picture, different perspectives. Some same, some different. Mother Earth. I love it. Cynthia sees the mountains. A lot of people see this, the mountains first, and then a mother and child, hands clasped together. Some people see praying, but this idea that it's the same thing, but it could be seen differently. So think about this as we talk about life and how people interpret their lives. If they have a traumatic situation happen, they look one way, but over time, and even during the same time, you could look at it a different way if we're applying it. We could look at age a different way. It could be the worst thing ever, aging, or it could actually be something to look forward to, or something that you decide that really isn't even important to define. Okay, and Tina says most people, each person will see something different depending on their frame, and that's true. It's true where people are coming from, and then it's part of us to pick it up and acknowledge that there might be different perspectives. But we can look at the same thing, and it can shift over time for people and how they find meaning. A lot of Holocaust survivors do that too. So if you can take that in mind, we've explored it both intellectually and then visually and in reflection. I do want you to think back to childhood for a little bit. I put the links in to these YouTube videos and they're also available. I won't take class. If we have time at the end, I'll play these songs, but it's the aquarium of child's imagination. Do you remember when you were younger? Everything was quite magical, colorful, Disney-like. You guys, do you live by Disney? So you're all sick of it, right? No, well, you're not by, okay, Disney, but most people in California are like, oh, yeah, enough of Disney. No dazzle for me. So, but here, this is underwater. This is actually a tank that replicates the ocean. But it's but we're used to staring to these aquariums for a long time. So you could swim, and to remember once again to swim in the creative wonder of being a child, because that's part of what happens, and a factor that fosters resilience. Because as practitioners in the field, you're going to be exposed to a lot of content within classes, but also in the field, especially in public health with a pandemic. And then also, when all else fails, listen to the children sing. They'll tell you, we don't need the Beatles. We don't need Beyonce to tell us that, or we don't even, well, we do need Martin Luther King, where love is the only way. But if that doesn't get through to you, then just go back to the kids. All we need is love. And this is a great song. It's sung by children from all over the world. And that reminds you once again, because they say, even though there's hate in the world, there's still love. They know that. They'll remind you if you get stuck in the framework. So as we go in, I'm just giving you this information because as we go in, don't get lost and drown in the tank of the suffering, because that's not the whole story. If anything, the wisdom keepers of the prison, I have to honestly say they were my best teachers. I've had some good teachers, but it was the people there in prison that I think that I deserve to honor my PhD. Because they basically told me, one man wrote to me, you might have your PhD, but I've got more than you have because I'm connected to the source of all that is and all the wisdom that there is. I thought, you know what? he's right. Really right. Okay, the highest power in all the records ever been recorded, and I'm taking stuff from a bunch of kind, ego-centered, well-intentioned, self-serving academics who need to publish for to keep their job. So I think that he had something to say there. So because in our, if we're coming from a problem focus of what a lot of research is, and you've probably read a lot about the problems, right? The ACEs, and now the kids, and right? That's from a problem focus. So if all else fails, that's people in prison, potential solutions, because they'll know how to fix it. So that's the colors of love. So we're getting into conceptualizing now. We're getting into the creative center of our brain. Have you studied about human rights in class? Yes, no? Did you touch upon it, Nimisha?
We touch on a little bit. It comes up in some of the topics,
Okay, social
but
justice,
not in depth.
social justice, right? It's big in, same thing, similar, just a different term. Same values of social justice. People should be treated like with dignity, respect, compassion. We should honor the intrinsic value, worthiness of other people, that we're all equal. Ring a bell, right? Makes sense. And so those are values to honor one another. And when we get imbalance, that's when we tend to create these hierarchies and oppression. So if we don't honor those values and we don't honor the human rights that go along, political rights, the right to vote, civil rights, the right to be free from harm and violence, economic, the right to earn a livable wage, social, the right to have a family, people in prison, separated from their family, LGBTQIA plus, they're going to run, they're going to take over the alphabet, the gay community, all the way to Z. But they didn't at one point in many places, or still don't, but in the United States, have the right to marry, right to family. Cultural rights, the right for any culture to come to America and be treated with respect. If these values were in place, then we have well-being. If these values, and there's a hierarchy, an imbalance where there's the dominant group over the subordinate groups, then we start to peel away at the well-being and the rights of what we often refer to as my. However, despite the fact that we do have oppression, there's resilience and coping adaptation there that can help address, maintain individuals, families, and communities while we're waiting to fix these bigger issues. Even within prison, there's lots of resilience within the populations. Sometimes stronger than in the community because they had to learn how to be resilient. So to bounce back. And if anything, Corona's taught us is how to be flexible. Okay, but foundations of care and justice. But human rights, nobody should be held to slavery or servitude or some of the rights. Everyone has a right to recognition before the law. The right to a family, I said. The right to work. Everyone has the right to a standard of living and adequate health care. These are ideals we're looking for in rights. And so we can look to those to help us think about where we're missing and falling short. Levels of oppression. Have you heard of the levels of oppression? This is important when we think about the prison population. The way that oppression can be transmitted is everyday life. You heard of microaggressions, correct? Right? A day-to-day conversation, could be in a classroom, it could be out in the streets, could be within your family, just Democrats and Republicans, in the same family. But it could be everyday life or within your practice in your community. But that's one-on-one types of interactions. It's transmitted there. It could be transmitted through the laws and the policies, right? You learned about policies that are racist or sexist, have adverse consequences that many people in public health are trying to change. How about institutions like prisons, educational systems, structural issues? Now, Weinstein said, speaking of his brain in a jar, is that you can have all the laws on the book, but if you don't have a spirit of tolerance in the population, they don't mean anything. So although we had things like civil rights, the right to vote among Black Americans, it was there. Was it adhered to? in the way that we'd expect from a kind and loving, if it was a kind and loving nation? No, right? Okay, so far so good. So here comes the cultural level attitudes transmitted through the media, the bias and type of coverage, the brainwashing, and even the potential of how much is true about what they're sharing on the news. How do we know? You're 100% sure that, who's a Fox News person? Can't remember. Hannity,
Hannity or Tucker Carlson.
or Rachel Maddow, or any of them, who knows? Or some other obscure, The Daily Show. He might be but who knows? Do we really know 100% for sure? So this cultural level of media and social attitudes, the music, violent Hollywood film. When was the last time they put out a history of Gandhi? 20 years ago? It was probably one of the last Peacemaker films. There might have been a few others. But the most important thing is oppression, according to this model. You can do it at these different levels, but it's only if a person internalizes it and believes that somehow, because of their race, age, color, race, age, gender, sexual orientation, gender fluidity, we're on the spectrum. It's only if you internalize it emotionally, intellectually, emotionally, that it has power over. So what does that suggest to all of you when we think about the multiple stigmatized identities, oppressed identities? We know there's a disproportionate of racial ethnic minorities within the justice system. We know there's a growing aging population. It's predominantly male, but there are women within the system. Any thoughts? Where might we intervene and get some track? Can we change the laws and the culture right away? Does that take some time? Can we go to the Capitol tomorrow and say, Barbara Lee up in San Francisco, let's pass Tucson racial healing and transformation bill? She'd love to do it. Takes time. But can we work with someone and get them to transmute this narrative, false narratives that says you're less than? In a world that in positive perspective, everyone's equal. So would you buy that working at the psychological level might be the quickest route than trying to change the people you live with and the way they think? Hasn't worked yet, right? But you can change yourself. Individuals can do that. And a lot of people in prison do self-care practices. Okay, so that's the model. And it's important to know because there's a different dimensions from a public health perspective. Wow, that's really cool. Whatever that did, I did not plan for that to do. Must be, okay. Wow, that was really 3D. Do you know the public health model? Same thing, oppression, those levels of oppression. We want to prevent at all costs. We didn't need to get to the end of the story where we have people on the edge of dying and we're all in lockdown for us to finally get, we're all interconnected. So here we are. But if we prevent the aging in prison crisis, could we have intervened sooner? Yeah, I'm seeing nods. Yeah, and if you can't prevent it, which in this model, they go a different, couple of extra levels. Prevention is like the whole world. Like, so if we want to say substance abuse is a social determinant of health and being exposed to violence and trauma, if we were able to prevent that by more positive messaging and stop promoting the violence in films and the news, and that could make a difference globally. And macro at the primary level is celebrating the strength and treating in terms of the whole population, preventing it. So how to treat each other with kindness could be and actually that's Lady Gaga. She's got a whole foundation teaching people just to be kind to each other. How cool is that? That's a macro intervention. Now, secondary at-risk populations, we want to catch the people at risk. People homeless on the street, social determinant of health, ring a bell. Kids who are traumatized, teens who are traumatized, adults who are traumatized. Let's get them some kind of assistance, public health. Tertiary interventions, they're already in it. Okay, they're in the justice system. We got to do something. So that would get to our next level. Another important level is research and evaluation. So if you're trying to find your niche, any of the research like I did, going into the prisons, finding out more information or what prevention techniques are working, you can make your contribution there. And you can really make a difference, but choose where you come in. Part of it might be where you feel your passion is, where you end up, and you work towards that shift. Prevention's often overlooked, but so important. And you'll see in their stories, and I'll get to them now, about in the prison system. Any questions, thoughts? So take away from that intro, there's different ways to intervene and look at it. It's a multi-level issue. Very important for public health perspective. But it's always leaning towards that we can do something about it. Now, this is a wise elder. Anybody want to read this quote out loud?
Hi everyone, this is Cynthia. I can read it.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Hi, it starts at home, then the community, and if all else fails, then the criminal justice system.
Right. Any thoughts you could put in the chat? Does that make sense? The criminal justice system is the last house on the left. You didn't have to get there. We didn't have to continue to blame the shadow society, the prisons, for all our woes. And realize the responsibility. And you'll see. So we look at the aging people in prison. We've got 10 million people in prisons worldwide. And Maschi gave us some stats at the beginning. It's growing. There's accelerated aging in prison. And mostly from the 1980s policy, if anything policy, created a mass trauma when they gave stricter sentencing policies. They're actually getting stricter now. We also know about all the disparities, the health disparities, especially hitting the Black and other racial ethnic minority communities. And we're all in lockdown at the same time in our own particular way. So here's a trajectory. Prison in Black, many steps along the way. Individual, family, community, all these steps had to happen for this to happen. Prison. And then they get on parole, and guess what? You think they're treated any better than they were before they came in? The system that sent them through? What do you think? Even if you never read a thing about it? No, absolutely. So here on the slide, I won't go through all the details, but there's individual level factors that lead to these cumulative determinants of health, social equity, and justice. And Namisha did type in about intersectionality. Many people have the intersectional identities. With the aging people in prison, if you think about every minority status, you can't, that represents that population. They are completely invisible. People, when I was doing my research, I was like, why would people let people die in prison, chained to a bed? And then also let them out and let them go without oxygen for days. What kind of world is this? So for the individual level factors that have a lot to do with personal identity, social locations, age, race, gender, trauma histories, but then there's a social structural level. Poverty, education, everything that the social determinants of health that comes out of mostly attributed to public health, oppression, access to services, all that put together creates what, when we were born, that's the beginning of life. Good life is good. We already went through the life course. We find out we're at a critical mega point. We can't even house any more people in prisons and they're dying. And we have nowhere to put them and they're a mess. And so this mass aging and dying. So I'm going to go to look at some of the stories. And then go back to some of these stats. Let's take a look at some of the past ways. Would somebody like to read? So if it starts out with interpersonal trauma, do you want to hear some of these quotes from them? I think it's powerful if you're not that familiar. So let's follow the path. Anybody want to read interpersonal trauma?
I can.
Thank you.
I was sexually assaulted when I was 13. I have never trusted anyone after that. Tried to get even when I was a Marine. It was Pyrrhic victory at a devastating cost to me.
Thanks. Okay, so that's one. And you can put your ideas in the chat. But that's a lingering effect of trauma, right? How about family? Why Sophia? Would you like to read?
Sure. I was crippled when I was younger. My family member beat and molested me. I was tied to the basement poles, beaten, always told over and over again, you're a jailbird just like your father. This was so tightly put into my head, it blurred everything I saw.
Older man in prison. Neighborhood. In the urban jungle here, concrete jungle. Anybody like to, thanks, Sophia.
Neighborhood. From the 6th grade to the 10th grade, I was forced to survive in the madness of the concrete jungle.
Yeah, that was from an African-American man. Structural oppression.
I'll take it.
Hey,
The education I received in the Black community was different in content and context than that of whites. What I learned after 12 years of public education was that I was a problem, inferior, uneducable. I said that really fast, sorry. And a student and a victim. We Black men are on the endangered species list.
Yeah. Picking up all the messaging they're getting from the home, the educational system. We didn't even get to the news yet. And this is what is going on in the community. So we wonder, is it the prisons that are the problem? The only problem? How about mental health and homelessness?
I can read. I believe my situation is unique. For me, I committed a crime with the intention of getting caught because I was homeless. I suffer from schizoid affective disorder due to a nervous breakdown, loss of job, apartment, car, everything. I didn't want to seek shelter at a homeless shelter or church. I was too ashamed and embarrassed to ask for help from my sister and the 3 friends I have left in the world. Now I am somewhat stable. off meds and mental health roster, and healthy and strong again and getting better.
We'll get back to that one. What a message there. Later life incident.
I can read it. I was a very successful father of 3 kids with a wife to this day I absolutely adore. She's still waiting for me when I get out. I was a chief compliance officer for a brokerage firm in Manhattan, making over $300,000 a year. One night, after a night at the racetrack, I got into an accident going the wrong way on the highway. I hit a van head on with 4 passengers. I was hurt bad. All the passengers and the driver lived, but one was pregnant and she lost a baby. So I was charged with manslaughter and sentenced to prison.
Thank you. Another pathway to prison. I think that actually that might be it. Okay, yeah, that's our pathways to prison, and we'll go through, take a look at this diagram that gives the different levels of oppression, but it also does show coping. So let's go, now we're inside prison. If I want to read that, we're following the pathways. Some of you could substitute it for it's tough surviving class. Conditions of yeah. You ready, Jack? All right, buddy.
All right, so this is conditions of confinement. It's very tough surviving prison. The provoking, the unnecessary treatment, verbal abuse, violence, and violence only adds to the original sentence term to be served. Little things begin to add by therefore causing inmates to react in ways with custody staff or fellow prisoners. Overcrowded condition, poor medical service, lack of interaction with administrative staff, and prevention of free access to commissioner, and etc. is stammering.
Thank you. This slide here is a lot of different quotes that they talk about healthcare. A lot, and lack of contact with family. So I'll skip that. We'll get into life and death. One is a quote from Mary, and the next one's from Jorge. Anybody want to take Mary? She's a female prisoner, white Caucasian.
I can read it. Quote from Mary, 56-year-old woman in prison, served 5 years. Prison is a hard place, pure hell. As long as you are in khaki, you're considered non-human. I miss my family and want to go home so bad. I don't feel there is enough mental health available on a regular basis or the comfortable feeling of just expressing yourself without the fear of being put in lockdown. The elders suffer the most because there isn't much for them, us. The medical here makes no sense. Until you have an ailment, you are put off and time holds you back. I have the starts of osteoporosis, and seeing how some people, young and old, are treated makes me suffer and deal with it. I look at it that I will deal with it when I get home. In the meantime, I hurt and deal with it. Prayer and God is what gets me through every day, moment, second I am here. Overall, it's horrible and wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy.
Interesting, right? Okay, and then this one, whoops, I went way ahead. I'll make it a little bit bigger so you can. Anybody want to read this one?
We can read it.
Thank you.
The apathy of the guards toward dying inmates was unconscionable. We had one inmate about 30 years old whose wife and 2 small children were given permission for a special visit because he was near death. As shift change approached, a nurse entered the room and the family had to stand outside of the door. Sorry. A female guard yelled to the nurse, "Shh, sorry."
Oh, it's great. I love it.
Sorry.
The pets love to be in class. Can you tell? She's trying. She's narrating with you. Do not underestimate the power of pets. All right, sing along, little buddy.
A female guard yelled to the nurse, "Isn't he dead yet? I don't want to have to stay late to do the paperwork." The 2 little girls were sobbing in no time. We also had an inmate turn 100 years old there. He was completely bedridden. He passed away eventually. I was left wondering how society was being served by that. In the 6 months that I worked there, 6 to 7 inmates passed away. Hepatitis and diabetes cases abounded with many amputations.
Thank you so much. So that was Birth to Death. What do you think about humanity? That was our story. Powerful, right? Are the prisons the only problem? You guys know your mission now, right? Every point along the way. Choose where to jump in. We need you all there. But these individuals here in prison shared their stories, hoping that we would learn from this. So let's live up to their expectations of us. They have the highest ideal. And we don't have a lot of time, but it took me, maybe it was still the Unchained Mind. He's the one that said he's got more than a PhD. But it literally, this particular one, how could people not understand the pain and suffering of other people? How could bystanders watch? We've been bystanders. Maybe not so much the young generation, but the profession. I don't know about public health, but other professions. Well, I think public health really just took on criminal justice, right, Namisha? There's been a new addition. So they fell behind the ball because it was sort of segregated as if it didn't belong in prisons. People didn't even see them as part of a community. So I wonder why. But, in short, their hearts are closed. Their moral compass is shut down. We could, call them criminals. We could put them in prison. We could put the guards in prison too now, and then they become prisoners. And do they have rights now? And we can just keep incarcerating people, or we could just say we really need to take part in moving from ego-centered, fear-based thinking to creative, heart-centered consciousness. And what I refer to as caring justice, so that we get the system into balance. Too much wounded masculine energy, too much wounded feminine energy. Let's get left-right, right-brain integration once again. And that's in my article, and you can read about that if you didn't. So any powerful quotes you want to make a comment about? Anything really stick out of a particular meaning? Or is it the compendium of all of them together?
It seems like this exists because the greater society, and whatever that is, doesn't see the prisoners or inmates as humans, is that there's this perspective that they're less than, and that's why we can, treat them in that manner, and that they don't deserve it based upon how they got there. And yes, there's a percentage that's, probably did some heinous things that would make all of us cringe. But I think there's a majority of them that got there just for a lot of other reasons. And so I don't know, it just seems like that's how this just continues. As long as I don't see that person lying on the bed that's 100 years old as equal or human, or have that humanity, then I can just say, let's get this going so I can type up this report, go home.
Yeah, and that's a perspective, right? We looked at the mountain one way, it's a mountain, and then you can look at it another way and you're not seeing that other way. Because in a way it is as if they're blind, right? And so how do we get This is a challenge for all of us. How do we get people to shift? Now, in short, this isn't necessarily about the shifting. I'll get to that in a second. But you have the slides of all the resilience. It's the multi-dimensions and helping people transcend trauma. And this is from these people went through it. A lot of people in prison taught us how to do that. Same thing here, but it's inner resources, connecting to a higher power. When you connect to a higher power, you move from fear-based separation consciousness, where you would see separation, where you would see hierarchy. And you can make that decision. When you come from an inner, your higher self, if we think of a creator, like many of the people find spirituality, with this God that we're told about, I know we learn about the punishing God sometime, but that's coming from a separation mode. But when it loves everybody, is that possible to let that man die in prison? If everybody was made from love and are equal, and we are all interconnected, coming from that perspective, would we do the same thing? As opposed to coming from, I'm separated, it has nothing to do with me. I'm going home, I'm hungry. What do you think? We see the woman, parent, child praying. Just as easy to do? No difference? Any thoughts? Are you contemplating? But the trauma survivors, they're often the ones that come and are resilient. See that positive perspective. And go from being victimhood and bondage, living inside of a prison, whether they're in prison or not. It's when you set yourself free from victimhood and bondage, take off your own chains. Because there's a metaphor in all of this. And you could watch, I put the link in the chat to the 5-minute LGBT elders coming out of prison. A metaphor coming out is that we all, until we release and open up our hearts once again, to remember that we're all part of one big web of life human family. We will, I argue, and many traditions would argue, that that would help, opening up your heart. Let me show you the picture of the brain. We've mostly been educated on the left-hand side of the brain here, and even in higher education. It's too long to tell the story, but look up Kathy Davidson work. Control. Do what you're told. Don't think, just take orders. This paper's due, this is what you gotta do, that's it. The right creative brain. Creativity is part of resilience. Look at this side. Like we're rainbow. We are rainbow here, but here you've got your creativity, your right brain. So here's the left brain, which is considered masculine principles, doesn't mean man or woman. Logic, left brain, strategic control, good. But when overdone, ego center. Left brain, unity thinking. Happy, love, freedom, passion, creative, yearning, peace. In this space, you need them both. You need balance. And so getting them back into balance, not only just us as individuals, but as a society. If we do this, get into what I call a caring justice partnership paradigm, problem solved. Patriarchy, if you go with the feminist perspective, right? Domination. We have violence in families. Where the one in power, often considered the male, but not always, over the less dominant one, violence. The victim and there's offender. With trauma, there's resilience. Okay, there's the experience, and it's through the emotions. If it has a lingering effect, the emotions will continue to create, and emotions mean energy in motion. So there's an event that happens, you were traumatized and tied to a pole, and that man, he talked about the message, a cognitive message, you grow up to be no good, just like your father who's in jail, right? You can't change that event. His dad was in jail, he was tied to a pole. But what he could do is continue whatever those thoughts or feelings that went along with it, the shame, the unworthiness, self-hatred. Let that go. That event no longer has power. You've diffused it. Are you familiar with emotional freedom technique? Or EMDR? You've heard of that, right? They teach you to discharge the emotion. And the saying in EFT is, you do tapping on meridian points, is even though I experienced, let's say, childhood trauma, or I believed I was no good, I still unconditionally love and accept myself. And so that's what we want to do, is get people not to judge themselves anymore. What happened was what happened. Even if you committed the crime, there's nothing you could do to change that. But you could certainly turn one's life around, and as many people do in prison, contribute to helping others, like the aging people in prison. Here, Viktor Frankl survived the Holocaust in Germany. Holocaust survivor, lost all his family. He says this, between a stimulus, meaning an event happens, a trauma, and a response, there's a space in between. Are you going to react? Somebody says something, pisses me off. My boy dissed me off. My kids used to say in the prison. And you're going to do something? Shoot the person, which some of them did. Or you're going to take the time to think. And in that space in between, that stimulus and the response, is where all your freedom and power lie. You did in your own life, if you don't do it already, or if I could work with others to help them find that space in between. It's really that simple. You can ride that wave like over here, the worst thing in the world, or you could be that horse above it and say, you know, okay, this is tough, but I'm gonna ride this wave to shore. I'm in California, on the beach. Okay, and get to a place of balance. These are people who overcame difficult situations. Viktor Frankl also develops logotherapy, positive way of looking at life events. He says, find a purpose and a meaning. So here is this model, and we're probably getting close to out of time. So here's for moving from problem focused to solution focused. When you're in fear-based thinking, a lot of people in prison, including these guards, who are not thinking straight, if they wouldn't be probably saying things. They're fear-based thinking. It's a very survival of the fittest environment. It's hierarchy at its worst. But then again, there are the stories of resilience, and there are the stories of people helping and compassionate to one another. But if you move over here to the solution-focused, heart-driven, decisions are just much clearer. And you can work with people and you can work with yourself, but you move from dualistic binary thinking, black versus white, gray versus rainbow, whatever, division. So we unity thinking, we are all interconnected. The way you look at, just like that picture, trauma in one's life, trauma in someone else's life, or how we look at the world in general. Is the world a safe place? Is it a good place? Or is it an awful place? Or is it just have some things that fall short of where we want to go? But is there enough, are there signs of kindness in the world? Even within our anchors on TV. So when we look at defining and thinking about social problems, First of all, anytime we talk negative, ending poverty. Have we ended poverty yet? Have we ended gun violence? Have we ended drugs, the war on drugs? Does it make you want to end it? Who wants, it's like we're talking about war on drugs, as opposed to searching for or promoting positive spiritual practices. Because addiction is just trying to find what's missing, and that's your inner sense of guidance. Your connection is to plug back into whatever unchained mind figured out how to get in touch with. And you don't want to have to spend 20 some odd years in solitary to own and attach yourself to the God-given right, or whatever spiritual given right, that we're all part of something much bigger than ourselves. You don't want to have to go in solitary for it. We're solitary enough. And that's the lesson you can get from Corona, is learn reflection. Think about what you do before you act. Find that space in between. If you find that space in between with the clarity of your example, just like the aging people in prison will tell you, or show by the clarity of their example, that's wisdom. Not just knowledge, but wisdom. And so at the internal level, what it's going to take longer to do the bigger picture, but you all certainly can get into a self-governance model. We don't need a law to tell us to be kind to one another, do we? When was the last time you went home and told your family member, your partner, how much they meant to you and what it is about them? What about the last time someone said that to you? Wouldn't you like to hear that? As opposed to, I don't know, some cultures, at least my family culture, it's like the worst thing you say, that means they love you, and we don't have to do that. We can get a new lexicon, and we can figure out what this language of love is, because this language of binaryism isn't working. People are ending up in prison. We're hurting each other. And that's not our really intention. We just think it's going to work. So self-compassion, self-accountability. Gandhi said it, self-governance model. If we all had our what we agree on, and we did it within our communities, we don't need a criminal justice system. It's gone, disappeared. Self-isolation, see the solitude. Not like deprivation, but that time alone. It's okay. We make it the worst thing ever. It's this whole public health issue. And it's like, did you ever want to just be alone? Like, don't you remember, like, growing up? I remember my mom was opening my door. It's like, let me just breathe, right? Give me a break. It's okay, because you are never alone. You have your own inner guidance. And that's or sometimes you call it intuition. You need that. That's in center. You'll be able to tell the fake news from the true news too. So that's at the psychological level. And then when you get into working with one another, that's at the personal level. So the negative phraseology, that whole ending violence, just find a positive. We're promoting peace. Ending poverty, we're promoting prosperity and abundance. Abundance is everywhere if we look at it. I've got fake guitars behind me. This isn't my real living room. And there's my unconditional love dog. Loves you too. And if you unconditionally love yourself, it's just easy to do that for other people. So just foster that language of love. And we need to come up with a new lexicon, help come up with a new language. California has always been a place of innovation. There's a lot of sun, and that's very healing. Express appreciation, especially nature. And the animals do. They know a lot more than we think they do. They always, I'm telling you, they do talk in class. And tell us when to pay attention. All people, when they, somebody asked me, what do you call trauma survivors if you don't want to call them survivors? Because we still are labeling them. I said, why don't you try calling them by their first name? How about that? And don't call them, they're not diagnoses. So what is it? But it could be a person in recovery, but I tend to go with the idea of their co-creators of their experience, because they can choose how to shape their life. At the levels, if you end up working in policy. At the structural level, don't get into the more, I suggest, you do what you want, but you have your free will. Moral panic. That's what the news tries to do. To have you running ragged. And so sometimes these classes do too, to tell you the truth. I don't know about out there, but students so stressed out over assignments. I tell everybody to calm down, everything's good. We'll work it out. But fear, when you get immobilized, and that's when people can panic and pass laws that end up like these stricter sentencing policies that created this whole new debacle that we're dealing with. Fear-based mode, crime on the street, and using the images of Black men. We talk about from the Reagan Bush era, right? Willie Horton, do you recall that? All fear-based stuff. Top-down policy control. Campaigns using double negatives, just shift them around. Use reflexive social action. Do like Viktor Frankl did. Just don't go out and rush. I talked to people today about corrections. They're like, oh, the correctional officers, there's a sexual abuse that happened in a women's prison here. And these correctional officers, and I do not condone anything, but they're in a high stress position. People will do things that they wouldn't do if they weren't in fear-based mode. But they changed rules and everything and threw out all, not the correctional officers, but the system, and rushing policies and through that left this group vulnerable because they're on the front lines. So think about any campaigns you're working with or developing. Think about if you're using a double negative. Think about how you could phrase it to the world you do want, not the one you don't. Economics, develop collaborations, cooperatives. Research and evaluation, try to work with people, especially people incarcerated or formerly incarcerated, or whatever groups you're working with. Let them be the researchers, enough already. We've done enough harm with research. In short, the doctrine of discovery with the that started this whole debacle against the indigenous population. When the settlers arrived here, 95 million, by the time they were done with the doctrine saying that we could take over if people don't convert to Catholicism, you can annihilate them. 1 million left after not too long of a time. And so that practices, including in research, of not including people in the research team, or not even including them when they're disseminating information that were falsehoods about groups. Black community, the Indigenous and Native American community. Research. So if you're very passionate about your cultural groups, research, do it. Take the power back. Because you've got the lived experience, which is a way of knowing, as well as the research and the skills. And you balance that with the rational thinking, with the lived experience. And nobody knows better than about your culture. One, you don't want to be biased, also the other way, but when people don't know anything about a culture, it can be very destructive. So take your power back. There's nothing miraculous about research. It's really common sense. Participatory methods. And then negative media messages. I would say don't watch the news. Listen to Louise Hay. Or there's one of the authors sounds true. He's an African-American gay man who does meditation, and he's got some good social justice recommendations. But I think his book is called Woke Up. But he's got some good stuff. Caring justice culture. Resilience. Here's the different dimensions. Important part is participation. You know all these dimensions. Root is basically feeling safety, security, but exercise all the way to emotional, social, spiritual, or participatory is leadership positions. Work with people, peers, if they're not a professional, work with them as paraprofessionals, peer navigators. Nobody knows better than them how to help somebody else get through them. That's lived experience. That's wisdom. Here again, the domains. These are things they're able to do in prison. Self-care practices. These people ended up living stronger, healthier lives and helping people, including people who develop programs in prison. That's not actually a man who did it. This is a photo, but an AA group leader developed a victim program, grief programs in prison. Now, I'll just leave you with just a couple more things. Here is how you move people up the emotional states. Remember, the emotions carry the energies. You can use this to change your personal lives around too. But here in survival state, people will make decisions. False pride, so down from victimhood, bondage, unarousable, almost close to dead, suicidal type of. So there it's like little will to live, spare apathy, fear and shame's a little bit step up, but still low. Guilt, hyperarousal, money to people, you work with an injustice system or at risk of it there. Anger, false pride. False pride means that you come on, white supremacists, false pride. Right? Hierarchical. Somehow we're better than, right? They've in this faulty thinking and they're stuck there. Lower level survival state. Many don't mention also lower class. They don't have the elevated social class. And so they're stuck in this perspective. Desire is addiction. It's not like positive, but you have an addiction to something. Then when you start to get up, you're positive and creative. But down here, survival state, fear, and all these other lower level emotions. Then you move up to change, forgiveness, optimism, trust, being happy, understanding, gratitude, all the higher level love emotions, appreciation, unconditional love. And I will tell you that unconditional love, which is accepting people without judgment, meaning that even people, like a serial killer, hard to understand, which is actually the cover of my book. He's not judging it, observing it. And when you look at the lives, we saw these life stories. Do you see how maybe people would get to false beliefs that might lead them to make the choice to pull a trigger and kill someone? Not justifying, but can you see that that might happen? Any thoughts? We've got a big dog there, Carolyn. What's the dog say? Not justifying it, but can you see that that might lead someone to make a decision if they believe they're separate from someone and it's either me or them consciousness? If they feel a threat, that's either them, he or she, the person, or the other person. Think about it. And the good news is There's a lot in here you can take a look at, but there's a better world, and it does exist, and it has existed, and it will exist, and I'm complete and 100%. And this is caring justice. We replace criminal, and it's a framework that is a paradigm. It knows no walls. It's not stuck behind walls. It's not stuck in one system, but it's putting love, interconnectedness with justice and balance. And a community surrounded by nature, services at the center. Nature has a lot for healing, solar energy, healthy communities, healthy food, no pollution because there's buses that run around the circle here. The bus that takes everybody around. Everybody has equal access to transportation, housing, and access to services. No need for prisons. Or if there were, they're houses of reflection or houses of freedom. That's the world. That's our world. And then core aspects of caring, this unconditional love. And you could start there. Nobody's stopping any of us from learning how to do that to ourselves. You have self-critical voices, be gentle with them. Transform them, transmute it. You know how to do it now. And then you'll be able to do that even more with other people. Justice is truth, rationality, balance, equality, harmony, homeostasis. Living once again with ethics, heart-centered consciousness, heart-centered philosophy. All decisions are made. The heart, which has its own brain. Kindness, dignity, respect. Everywhere you go, everything's authentic. Everyone's authentic. You're all eccentric, let it out. Nobody's just like you, let it out. RuPaul and others have nothing on you. Robin Williams, who's your favorite wild comedian or musician? Lady Gaga, whoever it might be, Beyonce, Jay-Z. I don't know, I'm trying to think of musicians. So that's a partnership. Equality, no more hierarchy over world, but a shared leadership model, power within, power with. We're all equal on an equal playing field. Domination, conflict, duality, mental models replaced with cooperation and peace and harmony. Sound good? Good place to be? That's public health and public safety. We're all good part of it, people of all ages. And those are pretty much the highlights, intergenerational aspects of it too. We're all connected again across the web, across generations. I do add in different levels of I call it not levels of oppression because that continues to create oppression. I had to start where we were in the problem-focused world to take us to levels of reflection, respection, and connection. And from that perspective, there's so many more levels where we break it apart, particularly in the community where you do a lot of your work and you can do a lot of the work. Same lessons you do with yourself, as within, so without, as above, so below. Take what you learned and you know from yourself and apply it to the big system. All systems are interconnected. And animals, right there with us in the web. So that's the highlights, and there's caring justice aspects of both feminine and masculine principles in their exaltation and ideal. Neediness of the feminine moves into self-empowerment, love, compassion, mercy, and then other positive masculine aspects. Truth, transparency, being an encouraging force, responsible, accountable, active-oriented, linear thinking, and then compared to feminine, relational, harmony, support, types of dimensions. So that's all there. And that's pretty much it. And then once we go from oppression model to empowerment, We all, individually and as a collective, we have liberation, empowerment, and well-being. We're home in a caring justice world. That's what the prisoners can teach us, people in prison. Any thoughts? Feelings? Is it break time? And this is
We are coming up to our break time in a few minutes. But Dr. Maschi, I feel like my mind's been blown, and I just want to hold my book up. I have a copy of your book, and we just got it last month, and I'm very excited to introduce it to our recommended and required reading list for next year's class. Actually, it'll be in the summer because now we have it. And I am really excited to read about the findings of your research. And it's, I love hearing your message about how to, engage people who have been impacted directly in research and how participatory that is and how crucial that is to researchers, who are, working in clinical settings, or if they're working as public health professionals. Many of our community members are working in the field in various settings. And really, we're all here to really empower ourselves and other people. And I just thought that, just this focus on the right brain, left brain thinking, and how we need to shift our paradigms to solution focused thinking. And that really helps us change our language. That is so powerful. Getting away from using, binary, non-binary language, and the idea or concept of self-governance and having our own inner guidance as our, just that really changes our perspective, and producing that sort of conducive environment for compassion and understanding and growth. I think that's just so interesting, and what I can see in your research is similar to what I've experienced in my own research, focusing on wrongful conviction and exonerees, and how they've, each of the individuals I got to sit down with for 3 or 4 hours, had this amazing sense of resilience. I mean, incredible. Many of them were sentenced for over, an average of 30 years, some 17, some 10 years, but a really long time. And when they were finally released and freed by their innocence attorneys, they were, become over the age of 50, and were dealing with a lot of chronic illness and disease. And as a result of their lengthy sentences, but with all that, just this amazing sense of grace and peace and resilience. And I see that something very similar to, the individuals who participated in this study. And for me, it's been so hard for me to understand, like, how can you be so forgiving? But this has been very helpful.
Yeah, and the thing is, and I know you have a break, is that if you hold on to the weight, lower level emotions like feeling angry, and although there's a justification being when you're wrongfully convicted for something you didn't do, and you tell people you're innocent and nobody believes you, that's tough. And the thing is, with anyone who's been a victim, like they are in this case of wrongful conviction, you have the opportunity keep that load on, that heavy load, or just let it go. Let it go, let it fly off. And so it really lightens the load for them. And people make their choices. Not everybody does forgive, and people who lost a family member due to, a murder or drunken driving, just hold on to it for a long time. It's a choice. Everyone has free will. But those that let go, and you could probably find lots, if you don't know, of people like on NPR, of people that did, Truth and Reconciliation with, where a parent befriends the person who killed a family member. That seemed to be healing for them, at least the ones that are on these. There are models and examples that seem to make a difference for them. So everybody make their choices, just know that that's one of them. But forgiveness is a higher, or it's returning, allowing oneself to return to the place of love, because that's truly what it is. It's all love or return to it. It's all our heroes and heroines' journey. And now we'll get to a world where we don't have to lose it to reclaim it. Yeah, but that's it. That's what they have to teach us. And who's teaching who, right?
Right. Dr. Maschi, I have a question. So I know that you have your podcasts and, some of the videos, and I think there might be, I'm looking in the slides, they're in the slides. I went to the very first, like slide 3. And I know there's a Carrying Justice YouTube channel. I think everyone had that link. Everyone's got that link in Canvas. But I was wondering, is there more like music, more of your music?
I'm glad you said that. Yeah, on the Caring Justice YouTube channel, I did put my research findings to music, and I did it. It's almost it's a little punky, but 60s sort of rocky, and it's called "We Are All Aging Prisoners Until We Set Ourselves Free." And to forgive is to set a prisoner free and realize the prisoner was you. Because literally, if anything we can learn from them is that they figured out a way, because you cannot contain the human spirit. You could lock them behind every door in the smallest space you could ever get it, but you cannot. Nelson Mandela taught us that. He was a prisoner just for speaking his truth. And then the gay people taught us that. African American people taught us that. You cannot. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's a channel. And that's a 5-minute video you might want to watch if you can. Whether you do it here. Sometimes the videos don't work, but it's very powerful. Randy in the film, and Juan, this one in the middle there, he's passed. This second part was in memory of him. Beautiful person. And it's really the love story of prison. These are the people. Randy is an inspirer. I can't even imagine what he will do for people, but you'll love him. Because he's someone to me who's the new kind of person. He just doesn't make excuses for who he is. He's accountable for all his behavior. He knows what he's done. Even talks about he recidivated like 40 times in and out of prisons because he wasn't getting help, serious mental illness, but he holds no grudge. Yet he's now running a program, a psychosocial program for people with serious mental illness. This was a man who at one point could not be controlled and couldn't get rid of his addiction, and made some choices that he has learned to live with and somehow get to love himself. And if anyone, he will help you find a way if you need it for yourself. And he certainly could be a model for people you're working with. He's just that way. And even my students, when I show the video and he comes into my classes, he just inspires people. He's something else. I present with him sometimes. I don't worry about it, but he steals the show. As if it's a show. Yeah. And then the song over there, that's my findings, put to music.
Oh,
So,
great.
Well, best wishes with it all. I guess I'll leave you all to have your conversation. It's such a pleasure meeting all of you. I send you the highest of love and best wishes for all your endeavors now and as you go on. And
Thank you,
everybody,
Dr. Moore.
thank you.
Thank you
And
so much.
have a great evening. Okay, bye-bye now.
Thank you. We're excited to learn more about caring justice partnerships in the framework.
Sounds good. Okay, have a great night. Okay, bye-bye now.
You